An old hatred is a poison that seeps into the land itself. But even in the driest desert, truth can rise like a hidden spring. Arizona Territory, 1882. The sun was a merciless hammer against the red rock, boiling the air into a shimmering haze. Cordelia Montoya pushed her pinto mare onward, the animal's sides heaving with exhaustion. Behind her, two riders, relentless as the heat, closed the distance. They were Corbin Vance's men, regulators who enforced his will with lead and leather. A choking cloud of ochre dust, kicked up by a sudden wind, swirled around her, stinging her eyes and coating her throat. The mare stumbled, its leg buckling for a moment. Cordelia pulled hard on the reins, her heart pounding against her ribs. They were gaining. The sound of their horses was a drumbeat of doom, growing louder with every desperate stride she took. High above, nestled in the shadows of a weathered mesa, a lone figure watched the drama unfold. He lay perfectly still, a part of the ancient stone itself. His name was Kalen, and this land was the cradle of his ancestors. The people in the valley below called him the Phantom, a whisper in the canyons, more spirit than man. He was Chiricahua Apache, and his eyes, dark and sharp, missed nothing. He saw the desperation in the woman's flight and the cruel intent of her pursuers. Two men hunting one woman. There was no honor in such a thing. It was a violation of the balance that this land demanded. He shifted his position, the worn stock of his Sharps rifle cool against his cheek as he took aim. The rifle report was a sharp crack that echoed through the vast emptiness of the canyon. It was not a sound of aggression, but of warning. Dust and rock fragments exploded just ahead of the lead rider's horse. The animal screamed, rearing violently and throwing its rider to the unforgiving ground. The second man pulled his mount to a skidding halt, his eyes scanning the cliffs for the unseen shooter. He shouted a curse into the wind, his bravado dissolving into caution. This was Phantom country, and they both knew it. The chase was broken. For now, Cordelia did not look back. She used the precious seconds to urge her mare into a narrow, winding wash, disappearing from their sight. Kalen watched until the second rider helped his companion to his feet, and they retreated, leading the spooked horse. They would be back, he knew. Men like that did not forgive such interruptions. He remained motionless, his gaze following the path the woman had taken. He felt a strange disquiet. The Montoyas had been on this land for generations, a source of old pain for his people. Yet he had acted. He had interfered. He could not say why, only that the sight of the unequal hunt had stirred something deep within him, something that demanded action. He slung the heavy rifle over his shoulder and began a careful descent into the canyon below. He found her an hour later. The pinto mare stood with its head low, its leg favored at an unnatural angle. Cordelia sat beside the horse, her face pale beneath a layer of dust, her worn riding skirt torn at the hem. She looked up as he approached, her hand instinctively moving to the small revolver at her hip. Kalen stopped a respectful distance away, his hands open and visible. "Your horse is spent," he said, his voice a low rumble, calm and steady. "It can go no further today." Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were filled with suspicion and fear, but also a flicker of recognition. She had heard the stories of the Phantom of the Canyons. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice strained. "I am Kalen," he replied simply. "This is my home." He gestured vaguely to the towering rock formations that surrounded them. He saw the pain in her eyes as she tried to stand, her ankle giving way beneath her. He moved forward slowly. "You are injured. There is a place nearby where you can rest, a place of shelter." She hesitated, her mind racing. Trusting a stranger, an Apache no less, was a risk few would take, but the alternative was to wait for Vance's men to find her. She looked at his face, at the quiet strength in his dark eyes, and made a choice. She nodded. He led her to a place she had never known existed, a dwelling carved into the very wall of the canyon, its adobe front blending almost perfectly with the rock. Inside, it was cool and dark. The air smelled of dry earth, herbs, and wood smoke. Cured hides covered the floor, and a shelf held a surprising collection of worn books alongside tools and clay pots. It was a place of solitude and purpose. Her gaze fell upon a small, faded photograph on a wooden crate, a woman with kind eyes holding a baby. Next to it was a metal box, its lid slightly open. She could see the edge of an old document inside, bearing a faded seal that stirred a faint, unsettling memory. Kaylin prepared a poultice for her swollen ankle, grinding dried leaves from a desert plant with a smooth stone. "This will draw out the fire," he said, applying the paste with gentle, sure hands. Cordelia watched him, her fear slowly being replaced by a cautious curiosity. He was nothing like the wild heathens Vance described in town. He moved with a quiet grace, and his touch was surprisingly tender. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. He paused, his focus on wrapping the bandage. "I do not like to see the hunter torment the hunted," he said, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, intense moment. In that gaze, she felt a profound sense of an ancient and unshakable honor. As the desert sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in hues of orange and purple, Cordelia started to talk. She told him of Corbin Vance, the cattle baron who called himself the Judge, because his word was law in this territory. He owned the land, the sheriff, and nearly everyone in the town of Redemption. He wanted the one thing he could not buy, the Serpent's Eye Spring, the only source of clean, reliable water for miles, the spring that belonged to her family, the Montoyas. "He wants it all," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "And he will do anything to get it." She showed him the dark bruises on her wrists, hidden beneath the cuffs of her blouse. "He tried to force a marriage," she explained, her voice hardening, "to his foreman, a cruel man named Gage. With me as his wife, Vance would control the spring through him." The ceremony was to have been that morning. She had been held in a locked room, bound like a common criminal. She had only escaped when the priest, an old friend of her father, had created a distraction. "I ran," she said. "I did not know where to go, only that I had to run." The story painted a grim picture of a man who saw people as pawns in his game of power. From a secret pocket inside her bodice, she carefully removed a small, oilskin pouch. Inside was a folded document, aged and brittle. She handed it to Kaylin. "This is why he hunts me," she said. "It is the original Spanish land grant. It proves my family's right to the spring and the surrounding land. It is all I have left of my father." Kaylin took the paper with reverence. He could not read the flowing Spanish script, but he recognized the weight of history it held. He saw the official seal and the careful signatures. This paper was more than a claim to water. It was the root of a conflict that had stained this land for a very long time. He looked at her, at the fierce determination in her tired face. She was fighting for her home, for her father's legacy. He understood that. His own people had been fighting for their home for as long as anyone could remember. "This paper is a powerful thing," he said, handing it back to her. "But a paper cannot stop a bullet. Vance will not stop looking for you." Cordelia clutched the document tightly. "I know, but without it I have nothing to fight with. My father died protecting it. I will not let his sacrifice be for nothing." A shared understanding passed between them, the quiet acknowledgement of a fight for survival against a ruthless foe. Cordelia's voice grew quiet, her gaze distant as she recounted a story her father had told her. He said the trouble over the spring did not begin with Vance. There was an older conflict, a feud with another family. She paused, searching for the name. "The Black Mesa clan. He said there was bad blood between our families, going back many years." At the name, a stillness came over Kaylin. It was as if he had turned to stone. The poultice bowl slipped from his hand, clattering on the hard-packed earth floor. Every muscle in his body was tense. Cordelia looked at him, confused and alarmed by his sudden, visceral reaction to the name. He did not speak. He rose and moved slowly, deliberately, to the metal box beside the faded photograph. His hands, which had been so steady moments before, now trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a child's worn moccasin, lay a bundle of papers tied with a leather thong. He had never dared to read them. They were his father's legacy, a legacy of bitterness and loss he had tried to leave behind. Now, he knew he could not avoid it any longer. He untied the thong with a heavy heart, the silence in the small dwelling becoming thick with unspoken history and a dawning, terrible dread. "The man your father spoke of," Kalen said, his voice hollow. "He was my father." He held up a document. It was not a grant, but a treaty, written in both Spanish and the language of his people, detailing a shared use of the Serpent's Eye Spring. "My full name is Kalen of the Black Mesa clan." The words fell into the silence like stones into a deep well. Cordelia stared at him, her face draining of color. The phantom of the canyons, her savior, was the descendant of her family's mortal enemies. The stories she had heard were true. The feud was real. And now she was trapped in the home of the man whose family her own had supposedly wronged. "That is impossible," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. But it was not. It was horribly, terrifyingly real. "My father told me your grandfather broke this treaty," Kalen continued, the old anger he had inherited burning in his voice. "He said the Montoyas took the spring by force and trickery, driving my people from their sacred ground. It destroyed my family. It filled my father with a rage that consumed him. The weight of this revelation pressed down on them both, a chasm of blood and betrayal opening between them. The man who had saved her life was now the embodiment of a generational curse. A wall of history rose between them, built from the pain and anger of their ancestors. Cordelia slowly backed away, her trust shattered. "No," she said, shaking her head. "My father was an honest man. He said the feud ended peacefully. He said your people agreed to new terms and left willingly." Kalen looked from the treaty in his hand to the grant she still clutched. Two stories, two truths that could not possibly exist at the same time. The bitterness in his heart warred with the quiet integrity he saw in her eyes. Could his father, blinded by rage, have been wrong? Or was she, like him, merely repeating the story she had been told? "My father would not lie," Cordelia insisted, her voice gaining strength. "He believed the matter was settled with honor." "And my father died believing he was cheated," Kalen countered, his own conviction wavering. "Why? Why would our families have such different truths?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. A seed of doubt began to sprout in the barren ground of their inherited hatred. A third possibility emerged, a shadowy figure moving behind the scenes, someone who stood to gain from their division, someone who might have fed them both lies for his own purposes. "Vance," Cordelia whispered, the realization dawning on her. His father, Old Man Vance, was here back then. He was always trying to buy the land from both sides. Kalen's mind raced. He remembered his father cursing not only the Montoyas but also the elder Vance, calling him a vulture who profited from their misery. Could it be? Could their families' feud have been deliberately ignited, fanned into a destructive fire by an outside hand? The thought was both horrifying and strangely liberating. It meant their families might not have been enemies, but victims. Both of them. This new, fragile possibility became a bridge across the chasm of their past. They were no longer just a Montoya and an Apache. They were two people ensnared in the same web of deceit, a web spun decades ago. "We need to know the truth," Kalen said, a new resolve in his voice. "The whole truth." Cordelia nodded, her fear replaced by a steely determination that mirrored his own. "The only place to find it is in Redemption," she said. "In Vance's records. We have to go there." Their individual quests for survival had merged into a shared journey for justice, a journey into the heart of a darkness that had poisoned their families for generations. They arrived at the town of Redemption under the cloak of twilight. The old Spanish mission at the end of the dusty main street was aglow with lanterns, the sound of a nervous organ drifting through the evening air. The forced wedding was already underway. Men with rifles leaned against the adobe walls, their presence a clear warning. Cordelia's heart sank. They were too late. But Kalen placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It is not over," he said, his dark eyes scanning the scene, assessing every detail, every shadow. He saw the tension in the crowd, the fear in the faces of the townspeople, forced to witness the ceremony. With a boldness that stunned Cordelia, Kaylin walked directly toward the open doors of the mission. She hurried to keep pace, her mind racing. What was he planning? Inside, the air was thick with incense and fear. Corbin Vance stood near the altar, a smug smile on his face, while his foreman, Gage, waited impatiently. The priest was stammering through the rites, his eyes pleading for deliverance. Kaylin stopped in the center aisle, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "This ceremony is a lie," he declared, his voice clear and strong, echoing off the high ceiling. Gasps rippled through the congregation, Vance's face contorted with rage. "Who are you to interrupt?" he snarled. "Seize him." But Kaylin did not move. He looked directly at Cordelia. "By the old laws of this territory," he announced, "a woman cannot be forced into a union. She must give her free consent. If she does not consent to this man, I will offer her my own name here and now before these witnesses." A shocked silence fell over the mission. It was a desperate, unheard-of gamble. Vance laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She would never marry a savage." He turned to Cordelia, his eyes like chips of ice. "Tell them, girl. Tell them you belong to Gage." All eyes were on Cordelia. This was the moment. She could submit and seal her fate. Or she could take the hand of a man whose family was her own ancient enemy, a man she barely knew, but who had shown her more honor than anyone in this room. She looked at Kaylin, at his calm, resolute face. She saw not an enemy, but an ally, a protector. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I do not consent," she said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "I give my consent to him, to Kaylin." In the ensuing chaos, a gunshot shattered an oil lamp. Flames erupted, and as the crowd scrambled for the exits, Kaylin grabbed Cordelia's hand, and they ran into the night. Gage's furious shouts echoed behind them as they plunged into the labyrinth of dark alleys. "Find them!" he roared. "I want them found!" They ran, their footsteps muffled by the soft dust, the smell of smoke from the burning mission filling the air. They needed a place to hide, somewhere Vance's men would not think to look. Kaylin led them toward the edge of town, to a cluster of shacks near an old, abandoned silver mine. He stopped before one of the doors and gave a specific sequence of knocks. After a tense moment, the door creaked open, revealing a grizzled old Mexican miner named Mateo, his face a roadmap of hard-lived years. Mateo's dark eyes widened in surprise when he saw Kaylin, then shifted to Cordelia, taking in her torn dress and the urgency of their situation. "Phantom," he grunted, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "It has been many seasons." He pulled them inside quickly and barred the door. "Vance has the whole town in an uproar. What trouble have you brought to my doorstep now?" Kaylin explained their desperate situation. Mateo listened patiently, his hatred for Corbin Vance a quiet fire in his eyes. Vance had stolen his claim years ago, leaving him with nothing. "The enemy of my enemy," Mateo said, nodding slowly. "You can hide here." He led them not into his small shack, but to the entrance of the old mine. "No one comes here," he said, lighting a lantern. "They say it is haunted by the ghosts of miners. Vance's men are superstitious fools." He guided them deep into the earth, through a network of dark, silent tunnels. He showed them a small, dry chamber with an air shaft leading to the surface. "You will be safe here for a time," he promised, leaving them with the lantern, a canteen of water, and a hunk of bread. The darkness of the tunnel felt both like a tomb and a sanctuary. In the flickering light, Cordelia looked at Kaylin, her heart full of a strange mix of fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper in the immense silence. "You have saved me twice tonight." He simply nodded, his face unreadable in the shifting shadows. The forced intimacy of their situation was palpable. They were husband and wife by a desperate vow, fugitives bound by a common enemy. "That old miner," she began, "he seems to trust you." Kaylin looked toward the tunnel entrance. "I helped his son once, many years ago. A man like Mateo does not forget a debt." The quiet nobility in his words resonated with her. He was a man who lived by a code of honor she was only just beginning to understand. a code far removed from the greed that ruled the world above. The next day, Matteo brought news. Gage and his men had searched the town, their frustration growing with every empty building. He also brought two unexpected allies, the town doctor, a compassionate woman named Lydia, and the editor of the local newspaper, a man named Marcus. They were part of a small, secret resistance against Vance's tyranny. "We heard what happened at the mission," Lydia said, her eyes full of admiration. "It was the bravest thing this town has seen in years." Marcus, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, held up a leather-bound ledger. "We have been gathering proof of Vance's crimes," he explained. "This is what you need." In the dim lantern light of the mine, they examined the ledger. It was a meticulous record of extortion, fraudulent land claims, and intimidation. But it was a single, tucked-away letter that made Kalen's blood run cold. It was written by Corbin Vance's father to a business associate decades ago. With a growing sense of horror, Kalen listened as Marcus read the words aloud. The letter boasted of a clever scheme, using a young, vengeful Apache warrior, still grieving the loss of his family's land, to serve falsified eviction papers on the Montoya family for a different property, thus deepening the animosity between them. "He speaks of a young warrior full of rage," Marcus read, his voice grim. "He says the boy was the perfect tool, eager to strike a blow against the Montoyas, never questioning the papers he was given." Kalen staggered back, the full weight of the manipulation crashing down on him. He remembered that day, years ago. A younger, angrier version of himself, delivering a document he could not read, feeling a bitter satisfaction in serving what he thought was justice. He had not been an instrument of justice. He had been a pawn, a weapon, willingly used against the very people he had a right to hate. The shame was a physical blow. Cordelia saw the torment in his eyes. She read the letter over Marcus's shoulder, her own anger rising not at Kalen, but at the breathtaking cruelty of the Vance family. They had not just stolen land, they had stolen lives, turning neighbor against neighbor, fanning the flames of hatred for their own profit. She placed a hand on Kalen's arm. "This was not your fault," she said softly but fiercely. "You were deceived. We both were. Our families were." The revelation, as painful as it was, solidified their bond. It was no longer just his fight or her fight, it was theirs. And the ledger in their hands was the weapon they would use to win it. Their plan was simple and dangerous. Marcus would print a special edition of his newspaper, laying out all of Vance's crimes for the whole territory to see. As they worked feverishly in the hidden print shop behind Marcus's office, a lookout signaled danger. The town marshal, a man firmly in Vance's pocket, was leading a posse, conducting a building-by-building search. They were trapped. Thinking fast, Kalen created a diversion. He used a rag soaked in printing chemicals to start a small, controlled fire in a barrel of waste paper at the back of the building. As smoke billowed into the street, causing panic and confusion, they slipped out. They ran into an alley, only to find their path blocked by Gage and two of his men. The fight was sudden and brutal. Kalen moved with a fluid grace, using his knowledge of close-quarters combat to disarm one man, while Marcus used a heavy wooden mallet to fend off another. In the struggle, they managed to corner Vance's bookkeeper, a nervous man who had been swept up in the posse. Under the terrifying shadow of the spreading fire, his courage crumbled. "It is all true," he shrieked, his eyes wide with terror. "Vance had Montoya's father killed. He used dynamite to make the mine collapse look like an accident." The confession was the final piece of the puzzle. But before they could act on it, the marshal appeared at the mouth of the alley, his shotgun leveled. "End of the line," he snarled. Just as he was about to fire, a shot rang out from a rooftop across the street. The marshal cried out, his shotgun clattering to the ground as he clutched a wounded shoulder. It was Dr. Lydia, her small hunting rifle held steady. "I believe you have an appointment with justice, Marshal," she called out, her voice calm and authoritative. The unexpected intervention gave them the moment they needed to escape into the chaos of the night. The town of Redemption was in turmoil. The fire, the gunshots, and the damning words of the bookkeeper spreading like wildfire had finally broken the spell of fear that Vance had cast over the people. Shouts of anger and defiance began to echo through the streets. Kaylin, Cordelia, and their allies regrouped in the doctor's clinic. They had the proof, they had the confession. And now, it seemed, they had the town behind them. The long night of tyranny was ending. The dawn would bring a final, decisive confrontation. A battle not just for a spring or a piece of land, but for the very soul of the town. The final showdown took place on the sun-baked plaza in the center of town. The people of Redemption, inspired by the fugitives' courage, had erected barricades. Corbin Vance, seeing his empire of fear crumbling, rode in with a dozen hired gunslingers, professionals with cold, merciless eyes. He expected a quick, bloody end to the uprising, but he found a town that was no longer afraid. At the forefront stood Kaylin and Cordelia, no longer running but ready to make their stand. Vance laughed. "You and what, army phantom?" he sneered. "This army," called a voice. Dr. Lydia stepped forward, followed by Mateo, Marcus, and dozens of other armed citizens. In a fit of arrogant rage, Vance publicly confessed to everything, convinced his guns could erase any truth. "This land was built by strong men who took what they wanted," he bellowed. "Your families were weak. My father outsmarted them, and I am simply finishing his work." As he spoke, his hand moved toward his revolver. "Kill them all!" he screamed. The plaza erupted in a deafening roar of gunfire. Kaylin, using his knowledge of the land, had placed a small dynamite charge near a precarious rock formation on the cliff overlooking the town. He lit the fuse. The resulting explosion did not harm anyone, but sent a river of rock and dust cascading down, cutting Vance's men off from retreat. The tide of the battle turned. Trapped and outnumbered, Vance's hired guns lost their nerve. Some surrendered, while others were wounded or driven off. In the end, only Vance remained, cornered and desperate. He grabbed Cordelia, holding his revolver to her head. "It is over, Vance," Kaylin said, his voice steady, his own firearm aimed. For a heart-stopping moment, the world stood still. Then, with a defiant cry, Cordelia drove her elbow back into Vance's ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Kaylin needed. A single shot echoed across the plaza, and Vance's revolver flew from his hand as he fell, wounded but alive. Days later, a circuit judge arrived and held a formal court. Vance and his men were sentenced to long prison terms. The judge legally recognized the union of Kaylin and Cordelia, born of fire and desperation, and affirmed their joint ownership of the Serpent's Eye Spring based on both the Spanish grant and the Apache Treaty. The feud was officially over. As the sun set, painting the canyon in soft colors, Kaylin and Cordelia stood on the land that had once divided their families. They looked out at the spring, its water clear and life-giving. The past was a landscape of scars, but the future was a shared horizon. They would rebuild, not on the ruins of hatred, but on a foundation of truth, forgiveness, and a love that had bridged a chasm of generations. Their shared home would be a testament to a new beginning.